Welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students, brought to you by the Union of Jewish Students of the UK and Ireland. I'm Samantha, the Campaigns and Inclusion Officer at UJS.
And I'm Tash, the JSOC Chair at Birmingham JSOC and a Fellow on the UJS Leadership Fellowship for 2024 to 2025.
On today's episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students, we're joined by Tiffany Harris. Tiffany serves as the Chief Programme Officer at Moishe House. Before joining Moishe House, Tiffany was with Amazon, where she managed a global education initiative focused on advancing IT and cloud skills. Her career also includes impactful service as a public affairs specialist at Peace Corps in the US federal government, where she co-founded diversity initiatives and was named to the Peace Corps 40 Under 40 list. Tiffany, welcome to Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So before we sort of begin, if you could run through what Moishe House is, sort of your initial interest in sort of joining and being a part of Moishe House as well would be great.
Absolutely. So Moishe House is a global organization. We serve Jewish young adults in their 20s and 30s. We operate in over 30 countries around the world, and we have 12 different programs that we offer to engage Jewish young adults. So those include our Moishe Houses, which is like our namesake. We have Moishe Pods, and in our houses and pods, these are young adults living together and programming for their Jewish community. We provide a rent subsidy and a programming budget and also training. And then I like to say we get out of the way and let leaders lead, and they come up with the most interesting and impactful programs for their fellow, the Jewish young adult community that they serve. We also have Moishe House Without Walls. This was originally intended to be our alumni initiative. So these are individuals who run one program per month for young adults in their community. And then we have immersive learning retreats. These are weekend-long, really, really fun retreats, mostly for Moishe House residents and pod hosts and MHWOW hosts, which then train them to run the programming. And then we train people to lead retreats. We have adult summer camp, which is really fun. I don't know if you guys or anyone listening went to summer camp as a kid, but this is like reimagining summer camp as an adult. We do like Maccabi games, color wars, like it's really, really fun. And then we have BASE, which is like it's similar to the Chabad model, but a pluralistic version of Chabad. Really, really incredible rabbinic couples who run programs out of their house. And we have a number of other initiatives that we use to engage Jewish young adults. So it's a really vibrant, just fun place to work. And throughout the course of any single year, we engage somewhere around 230,000 Jewish young adults.
I love that. It's amazing. I love the specific focus on young adults. I think it's a great sort of like, obviously transition sort of age group from post-university into like careers and families and all of that sort of stuff. So how do you see the sort of business model and the approach from Moishe House evolving with the different needs of those young adults, and like especially in today's climate and like today's world where young adults are very much involved in social activism and getting more and more involved in that sort of area? How does Moishe House adapt to their needs?
Yeah, so first, my boss, our CEO, is the founder of Moishe House. And when he graduated college, I think he was involved in like BBYO and Hillel and those sorts of things. And when he graduated, he realized like there's not really anything besides joining a synagogue, which can be great. And that's kind of the model that the Jewish community had for many generations, right? Like you finish your schooling, whether that's like high school or college, and then you get married and you join a synagogue and then like it's done, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now like we're part of a generation where that gap is widening between graduating college and then starting a family and quote unquote, people can't see me, I'm doing air quotes, settling down. I like to say settling up, but that gap is widening. And so there was really a need to engage folks during that time period and give them meaningful ways to be part of a Jewish community, and not just to be part of a Jewish community, but to help build and lead in these ways. And so that's the purpose that we serve. And I'll say the way we've remained adaptable and nimble to the ever-changing needs of the young adult community that we serve is that we really like to lead from the bottom up. Like we're very grassroots. I talk about in my organization, an org chart where the people we serve are on top, and then our staff members who work directly with those individuals are next. And it's kind of like an upside down triangle in that way. but we're really, a lot of our strategy and the way we program and the way we lead is really informed by the communities we serve, because I think that young adults know best about the trends that they're seeing, the emerging needs. So again, we provide the training and the resources, and we let them help inform that strategy.
I think that's so great. And another part about Moishe House is that it's global. It's an initiative that exists all across the world. So how do you sort of continue to build that sense of connection and cohesion between the different sort of countries and areas that you interact with?
Yeah, and I would say it's like one of the most amazing things, not just about being part of the Jewish community, is that you have this incredible global network, but being a part of Moishe House as well, because we really are, I mean, we had a house in Uganda at one point. We're on like virtually every continent in the world, which is incredible. Where there are Jews, I like to say there can be a Moishe House. But one of the things we do, which I mentioned before, are our immersive learning retreats. So we bring folks together from around the world to do these learning retreats together, and they're focused around a theme. Sometimes it's like Jewish holidays, topics like how do you incorporate, I'm trying to think, there have been so many like interesting topics. Sometimes it's around a trend that we're seeing in the community and like how you can build programming around it. We do like an outdoor adventure retreat for people who want to do a focus on like nature in Judaism, or like hiking in Judaism. There are so many different ways to reimagine Jewish practice and Jewish life. So that's an opportunity we have to bring folks together. We have our global and national resident conferences. So we bring our residents from all over Europe and Latin America together, and they do training together and they spend the weekend together, which is really, really nice. We do like the blessings in like 17 different languages. It's really fun. And then we see houses around the world doing programs together, sometimes virtual programs. Like in 2020, our house in Minneapolis was talking about the protests that they were seeing in their community with a house in Milan. And so we see a lot of interesting collaboration between our community builders, and we try to bring them together in person as much as possible.
You're talking about these like shared Jewish values and how even across communities there can be a lot of similarities between different residents. One of your key aspects to your business model and everything is about Jewish leadership and encouraging leadership opportunities for your residents. Is there anything inherently Jewish that you would say is a part of leadership? Like, is leadership a Jewish value for you?
Yeah, there are a number of things that are really, I would say, like core Jewish values and core leadership values that we try to instill in the population we serve. I would say the one that is really critical right now, and I'm sure, folks who are listening and then just in the work that you're doing, working with Jewish students and being on campus, are how do you manage like the polarization that's happening right now, the political and social polarization we're seeing. And so as a part of the leadership journey that we have folks go on, both in our staff and in the young adults we serve, is around constructive dialogue and viewpoint diversity. We're really, really focused on making sure that our young leaders are equipped with the skills to be able to have difficult conversations in a respectful way. And it's a Jewish value, right? Like Havruta is grounded in being able to have like a disagreement, and this idea that deep learning can come from disagreement as long as, malachet l'shem shemaim, right? Like the relationship is preserved at the end of the dialogue. So that's a core leadership principle for us, and one that we really, really lean into, I think, particularly with conversations around Israel right now. We have a big election happening in the United States, and we want people to be able to talk about these things, but we don't want it to be combative and toxic in that way. We want people to be able to see each other as fellow Jews, as fellow human beings, and maybe come away from the conversation having learned something about someone else's perspective or experience.
So at UJS, we also have a leadership fellowship that we launched it last year, but we've just reopened it this year, and Sunday was our first
Congratulations.
fellowship. Tasha's on the fellowship, which is really
awesome.
Great. And one thing that you have often spoken about is that Moishe House isn't about empowering people, they're already empowered. You're all about sort of giving agency to those people, and to allowing people to sort of fulfill their potential. What advice could you give in that sort of sphere to the fellow leadership students that are about to spend the next 8 months sort of going through this leadership journey?
Yeah, it's really great. So I'll touch on that a little bit, and just to say, for people listening, and I think in a lot of the organizations we work, you hear this language around like we empower. And I'm very honest in saying that like we don't empower anybody. Like young adults already have the power, like they are equipped with everything they need to be successful and lead and drive the kind of change in our communities that we need to see. What we do is we provide training and resourcing. We give agency. And so I want every person who is like maybe sitting on the periphery or in a leadership position to really know and understand that. And I think particularly with the age group we work with, and folks in the fellowship might feel a sense of like imposter syndrome, like maybe I'm not a leader yet because I don't have the title or I don't have this much work experience. Like, no, you absolutely are. And people in that scenario as well, like are often more in tune with their communities and the needs of the Jewish community than those of us who are a little bit like older or sort of sitting in a different space. And so what I would say is like, use your voice when you have a seat at the table, know that you have the power and the agency, and you're really serving an important role in informing us of our strategy and decision making, and to hold us accountable whenever we can do better, or if there's a great idea or like a need that we're not serving, because our job is really to like equip young adults with what they need to be successful.
I love that, because I think young adults, and especially like recent graduates, they would often struggle with the like getting into a career that they want and things like that, because sometimes the issue is you haven't got enough experience. And I guess the takeaway from what you're saying is you don't need the experience, you need the voice and the like a role in the first place to then just get your foot in the door. So
And you need to, and try to find someone in the organization too that's like a supporter who can be, there's like mentors and sponsors, but like someone who can be sort of a sponsor in the way that can like help you advocate for your ideas as well. If it's like, if that's an uncomfortable place to be in, or you don't necessarily have like a seat at the table quite yet, that they can help move some of that forward. But
I was just going to ask, it might be too soon to tell, but obviously with the focus on young adults at the moment, have you seen a sort of shift post October 7th? Given that some of these adults might be coming from universities where there was high levels of anti-Semitism and that sort of stuff on campus, have you seen a shift in people applying for houses at Moishe House or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can't say yet that we've seen that shift necessarily play out in our houses quite yet, but we are paying really close attention to it, because it is like individuals coming from the college campus environment who will be the next generation of Moishe House leaders and community builders. I mean, not just in Moishe House, but in the Jewish community writ large. And I think one thing I'm thinking about, and we are seeing at Moishe House, is that it's like, and I was a Moishe House resident 10 years ago, like it was almost just like pure fun. Like that was like, and now I think there's a little bit more of a risk associated with being a very visible leader in the Jewish community in this way, just because of rising levels of anti-Semitism and so on and so forth. So we're very conscious and very aware of that, both in terms of like how we allocate and make decisions around security processes within the organization, but also the support systems that we provide for young adults, because it is more of a heavy environment to operate in than it was when I was a resident. And I know that for a lot of our residents, they're doing these programs and inviting people into their home. And then the world that you go out in outside of a Moishe House or outside of like, Jewish youth group is a little bit hostile to the Jewish community right now. So what can we do to help shore people up, like mentally, physically, spiritually, so that they feel equipped, like to be able to do this work? But I think those are shifts that we're really paying attention to and trying to build now to be able to support this generation, because their needs will be completely different than what mine looked like when I was a resident. And even from the folks who are in the houses right now, it's a really difficult and complex environment to serve, which is no surprise to you both or to the people listening. But yeah, we need to build for that. But that's also another area where, again, using your voice in that way, and for students and young adults to be using their voice, because it's hard we're watching like the campus protests from TV, and it looks terrifying, but don't necessarily know exactly what people need to help counter and support that in that moment. So helping, use your voice and helping advise in that area is like really, really helpful.
I think one thing is sort of definitely the uncertainty of the next wave of incoming sort of Moishe House participants, the new wave of students, sort of coming to campus now. But one thing that is quite special, and I find that Jewish society sort of follow a similar suit, is that diversity of opinion, that diversity of cultural, religious, denominational differences within the Jewish community. How do you approach that within Moishe House, and how do you sort of celebrate that as well within your work? You also have previously done a lot of work within diversity and inclusion, if you wanted to touch on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's like one of the most exciting things about being Jewish and about getting to work at Moishe House is being able to serve being a part of this beautiful, diverse population, being able to serve in that way. I've talked a little bit before about when I grew up, I saw one type of being Jewish. I saw one look of being Jewish also. Like I just didn't even know that there was like this multitude of ethnicities, identities, and practices that exist out there. And it was just so eye-opening to be able to see it for the first time in Israel. And then now, then I like moved to the East Coast and I was like, wow, there are like all different types of Jews out here. And then now being able to travel the world with my work and my job and just seeing the variety that exists out there, it's really, really incredible. As it relates to Moishe House, we're a pluralistic organization. So we create programs and we try to create our houses in a way that serve everybody. And in a place like London where there's or in the UK where there's like that, I think, diversity that exists within the Jewish community, you can see like all shades of the spectrum in like a couple blocks in the city, which is really amazing. But in a city like London, we'll have multiple Moishe houses. So one that serves like a more observant demographic and all types of observance levels so that people have a place to go and to feel seen and heard. I think for diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the most important things that we think about in Moishe House and in the field in general is this sense of belonging, right? Like none of the other aspects of DEI can exist unless people feel like they belong somewhere, like they're seen, heard, and valued. And again, having a seat at the table, it's an analogy I use all the time because it is really, really incredibly valuable. And so we think a lot about that in how we design our programming and the policies that are around it. But we have all different types of Moishe houses that serve like multitude of demographics. And then we have Moishe pods, which were part of a strategy to serve more potentially niche demographics. So our houses, while they'll serve maybe a wider population, and they might vary on observance levels and practice, our Moishe pods are like, we have like a Persian pod, we have a Bukharian pod, we have like the LGBTQ pod, it's like LGBTQ and something else, but like we have like very unique, just different ways of reimagining Jewish life and engaging different populations. But I like to say there are like enough seats at the table for everybody, and so we try to build for that.
On that sort of note of the global nature of your work and the cross-cultural, cross-denominations inclusion note, is there anything specific that you've learned from different cultural environments that you've worked in? Because I know you've worked in lots of different countries. Is there anything that you've noticed in those environments about the Jewish community specifically? Similarities they share, that sort of thing.
That's a really interesting question. I think something that I really appreciate, that I've come to notice and appreciate, I mean, first, it's like the similarities are really just incredible. Like when you've traveled and visited different Jewish communities, it's like they can look so different on the outset. And then, the melodies or the tune of the blessings might be a little bit different, but a lot of us, we know those blessings. Or like you'll get a siddur and I'm like, I can't read anything in here except the Hebrew, like the local language, I don't know, but it's like, so there those pieces where you see that connection, and it's just that realization that it's like, wow, like our cultures developed completely outside of one another, yet for generations, yet we still have these really critical similarities that I think are really beautiful and important. I think in the UK and in the US, like this idea of young adult leadership and Jewish pluralism has really taken off in a little bit of a different way in the last few generations that isn't so big in some of the communities we serve, particularly in the Far East. And I'm hoping that we can continue to spread that movement because it's wonderful to be able to see young adults lead in that way, but there's also like it's important for us, I think, to create spaces for people who exist outside of like whatever the mainstream predominant Jewish life looks like, in that we have this idea that it's like there are so many different ways to do Jewish, and they can all be amazing and incredible and lead to really fantastic outcomes. And I think that is still taking off in some of the communities we serve in. So yeah, that's one difference that I noticed that I'm really thankful that we're able to enable through Moishe House. And I do hope that becomes like a wider global trend, because young adults, again, they need it and they deserve it. And these are really interesting people who have things to say and ways to contribute in the Jewish community. And so the more we can give people space and a platform, I think the better off the Jewish people will be in the future.
Definitely. Sort of moving back to your previous work, whether at Amazon or sort of with the US federal government, have you found any sort of skills within those sort of careers that you've brought forward with you, or was there any sort of Jewish values that you took towards those jobs before moving forward? How did you approach sort of a space that isn't inherently Jewish towards moving towards an inherently Jewish space of leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say, so when I worked in the US federal government, I was really passionate about working and, co-founding our Jewish employee resource group, which we didn't have before. It was my first year in the job, and I was still on like a probationary period where you can't take time off during Yom Kippur. And it was like the first Yom Kippur where I was like, I have to go to work. I'm scared to like ask for a day off. I'm worried about losing my job. And so that was like the impetus to me, that I was like, okay, I need to like bring, and I was still like very young, early career at this point. And so I was really nervous to like ask for what I needed or to stand up in that way. But it was a really important catalyst to do this work in the Jewish Employee Resource Group, and not only to become an advocate for like the needs of Jewish employees, because the federal government is a huge employer, like it's like the whole US government. So there are like tens and thousands of jobs not just around the country, but around the world that, work for the government. So not just advocating for the needs of Jewish federal government employees, but also like people of other religions who like none of our holidays were recognized before on a shared calendar. And so making sure little changes like that happened. But even my desire to work in public service and work for the government and work in development work, all stem from Jewish values, from this idea that like we have a responsibility to alleviate some of the suffering in the world. That's a leadership principle that I felt very drawn to my entire life. And so that's what led me to these different work sectors. And at Amazon as well, the program I worked on is a justice. It's a corporate social responsibility initiative that builds cloud skills around the world. So I always led with those values. And now working in a Jewish sector, I'm very thankful for like the experience and the career that I had before. But working in the Jewish sector, I really get to bring Jewish values to my work, which is like, it's so nice and it's really incredible. And I feel like I have a chance to shore up the Jewish future, which I didn't necessarily have a chance to do before in those roles. So it feels like a special blessing. And I would just say quickly around like things that I was able to bring from Amazon and the federal government. It's mostly around like finance and tech skills, but mostly things that can be trained on the job. So I know there's like this prevailing notion that it's like, okay, people need to go into the private sector and get work experience and then go work in the Jewish sector. And I think if you're in an organization in the Jewish sector that invests in you and has that mindset and will like invest in your growth and professional training, you can do that all on the job, like in a Jewish organization, while being able to lead and work with your Jewish values and bring your full self to the table in that way, which is a really beautiful thing.
On that note about your sort of Jewish identity and the values, could you just share a bit more about your time in Israel and how that impacted your choice to then work in the Jewish community?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the best experience living in Israel. I like never wanted to leave. My first experience in Israel was on a Taglit trip, on a birthright trip. Israel was like a place we didn't go like on vacation when I was a kid there, and I didn't have any family there, but my mom always talked about Israel, and she talked about like how important it was. I remember it was like Halloween one year. Do people do Halloween out here? Is it like kind of?
Not as big as America.
Okay. It's like huge in the States. But I remember like one Halloween, my mom dressed me up as like an Israeli flag, which was not the most popular costume in my public school. But like all that is to say, we grew up with this like strong sense of Jewish identity, though we weren't religious, and like a deep just kind of love and appreciation for Israel, though I will say it wasn't like as nuanced in terms of like the history and full understanding as I, have today and later developed from living there, which is just like Israel's great, so on and so forth. So I had in my mind like that I always wanted to go there. And I also, people can't see this podcast, or they can't see me since it's a podcast, but I'm a Jew of color. My dad's African American and my mom's Ashkenazi Jewish. And she'd always told me too, like, there's Jews of color in Israel. There are people who look like you. And I like totally did not believe her when I was a kid. And so just everything about growing up with this like vision of Israel as this very aspirational place was really just a pivotal moment in my life when I finally got to go there for the first time on this trip. And, all things Taglit, it was really fun and just had the best time. And so I made a promise to myself that at some point in my life, I'm going to move there and live there for a couple of years. And so I did a Masa program and ended up going to grad school in Israel and lived in Tel Aviv for a couple of years and just had the most amazing, amazing time. We all know it's such a tiny but dynamic country. And I felt really inspired by the history in Israel and the startup sector and everything that had been built over the course of years, while developing an appreciation for the nuance and complexity, both in all sectors of society in Israel, right? And the complexity of the conflict. But that was a really like pivotal moment in my life. And when I left, I ended up getting a really amazing job offer in the US at Peace Corps headquarters. And I really wanted to like work under the Obama administration. So it was an opportunity that I couldn't refuse, but it was really hard to leave Tel Aviv because I really growing up in the States as a minority, like always felt this sense that I love this country and I love my community, but not really feeling necessarily like I belonged anywhere per se. And when I went to Israel, it was just the weirdest thing that I felt this overwhelming sense of home and belonging that I had never felt before, where you're like, we're on a Jewish calendar, like almost the entire country is on a Jewish calendar and you see all different types of Jews. And so yeah, it was an amazing experience and difficult to leave, but I go back every year and I visit all the same friends and get to go to the beach and everything like that. But it's a very special place for me and definitely influenced the career path I took and the personal choices I made since that time.
I guess a follow-up question to that would be, what was that transition period of sort of spending that time in Israel and Tel Aviv to then sort of going back to sort of regular scheduled programming, I guess, of like the regular life in America?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. When I left Israel, I had this period of like, there's like a cross-cultural adaptation model that I forget exactly what it looks like, but it's like when you move to a new place, it's like at first you hate it and then like you're comparing everything to the place you just came from, like everything was better in X place, and then it kind of levels out and so that the mind goes through this process. But I definitely went through that. Like I hated being back in the States, and I was like, as soon as I have enough money, I just finished grad school, so I was like totally broke. But I was like, as soon as I have enough money, I'm going back to Tel Aviv. Like, I don't care. Like, that is where I belong. I miss the beach. And I also moved back to the States in January to the East Coast. And I only had sandals. I didn't even have a coat, and I like moved back to DC amid like a snowstorm. And I was just like, I need to like get out of here. This is not for me. And there's just like an air of life that's so fun in Tel Aviv where it's like, anyone who's been there kind of knows. I mean, it's obviously a very different place right now since the onset of the war on October 7th, but there was just like a lightness and a happiness and a chillness and a joy that I think people in Israel had that I was missing when I moved to DC. And it's like you can sort of in some ways be passively Jewish in Israel, like you're on a Jewish calendar, like it's the holidays, like everybody is celebrating the holidays, everyone around you is Jewish. And I realized coming back to the States after having been out for a few years, that it's like, oh, I need to like actively find and work for a Jewish community here and figure out how to plug in, because it doesn't just happen on its own the same way it does in Israel. And that's kind of what led me to Moishe House. But I had started out like trying to write to the different young adult Jewish groups. And I remember I wrote to one organization. I was like, hey, I just moved here from Israel. I was like thinking, oh, they're going to think I'm cool automatically. I just moved here from Israel. Like, this is going to be great. And it was like, no one was writing me back. Like, it was really hard to get involved. Or they would write back and they'd say, okay, great, we have this thing coming up and it's like $100. And I'm like, well, I just finished grad school. Like, I can't afford that. I was really kind of struggling to find my place, and also, you know, showing up at a synagogue every Friday. Also, for me, it just didn't feel like the right move. And so I was really thankful to be able to find Moishe House. And it was through being a Moishe House resident that helped me reacclimate, I guess, to life in the States and really find a Jewish community that felt like home. And as a result of having been a resident for a number of years, like, I have this amazing deep community in Washington, D.C. from my time as a resident. We're still all really close friends. I'm still really close friends with the people I lived with in the house. Each of us live in a different country now, and we text each other like every couple of weeks, mostly memes back and forth, but we're still really in touch. And I just have this incredible network and support system of folks when like people have gotten married and had kids or gone through like family tragedies, that we've been able to be there for each other, and also watching their leadership journeys in and outside the Jewish community. It's just been really wonderful. So it was finding the Moishe House that helped me find the rhythm back in the US. But I will say, before I found Moishe House, I was very unhappy for a long time and just very focused on getting back to Israel.
Going from being a resident to now obviously working there, what is it about Moishe House that like sets it apart from other organizations that serve young Jewish adults, and not just in the US but kind of globally? What is it about Moishe House that makes it different to other organizations?
Yeah, I will say we live in a time now where in a place like the UK and in Ireland, and many parts of the US, I mean, mostly in like coastal cities, there are a lot of great options for Jewish young adults, which is fantastic. I will say, you know, I work for Moishe House, but more is more in the Jewish community. Like, if there's a great way to serve young adults, we're definitely happy to uplift it. Jewish content floats all boats, as we like to say. But the piece that I do think is quite unique to Moishe House is just the level of leadership that we are able to offer to young adults. That it's like you're living in the house and you design, run, market, and lead the programs. We have like a pretty wide sandbox for people to operate in terms of like our policies and procedures and what we reimburse. But like within that sandbox, we really allow like a wide breadth of programming and creativity to be able to flourish. And I think that's still quite unique, just that setup there. And that it's kind of like, you know, when you're a Moishe House community builder, you are the front door of your Jewish community wherever you're serving. And I think that's also quite unique. Though there are a lot of amazing options out there, I think that's definitely what sets us apart.
You shared a lot of sort of the community development that you've done as a person, but also how you've sort of brought those skill sets to Moishe House, and also the community development that Moishe House does. For sort of the people listening, if they want to take away everything that you said, but they want to sort of do more research, they're interested in this, do you have any sort of further advice or books or any sort of article recommendations that you could sort of point in their direction?
Yeah, for young adult leadership or just getting involved?
Yeah, leadership or communal grouping and getting together with different people.
I mean, first I would say just a plug for Moishe House too, to like go to our website. It's moishehouse.org. We're also on Instagram and all the social media platforms at Moishe House. And so check out the different programs we offer if people are curious. I mean, we have community managers and program managers who work directly with young adults. So even if you're curious and you're like, I'd like to learn more about this specific thing, or this is what I'm interested in and I'm not really sure which route to go, we are here to help. We're here to serve the Jewish community in the ways that they need. So feel free to reach out to us and someone will get back to you. I think our immersive learning retreats are another great way to dive into community engagement topics, whether that's around a holiday or a specific theme. And if there's something that you think you need or you're curious about that we don't offer, let us know, because we're a very nimble, agile organization. I think that's another piece that sets us apart. And a lot of what we do is informed by the young adults in the community, both that we serve and the ones that we're not currently serving. So let us know if there's something missing. And if you're curious about something or see something specific on our website, reach out to us and we'll absolutely follow up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was going to go back to that topic of specifically students. Do you find that, I don't know if you said already, but are all of your residents coming from university or are some from different pathways into kind of post?
Not every, so we like to say we're post-college, pre-family, but in the US, it's mostly folks who are post-university, and we have a policy in the US that people need to be 21 and over because, kiddush, serving alcohol at the programs, that's the legal drinking age in the United States. Outside of the United States, it's 19 and older, but we do have some people who are currently students or they're graduate students or non-traditional students. So it's mostly post-college, but not always. And then as well in Israel, college happens a little bit later because of military service. So we do have quite a bit of students who are in our programs as community builders.
And do you see a difference in those who were university students and those maybe not in the US but in other places who came from a different route after school? Do you see any sort of Jewish values that are different in them?
I think the biggest thing I notice is just the ability to dedicate time to the programs. Students, I know students, and if people who are listening are students, I have every amount of empathy for you because students are busy, busy, busy. You're trying to juggle your academics and get good grades and prepare for a test and maybe have an internship. Maybe some people have jobs too, quite demanding jobs, and do the volunteer work and community building on the side. So the time intensity, I think, for students is quite a bit different. I would say, I'm also someone who went to university and I'm a big proponent of university, and more we're seeing people who have gone on alternative paths. They've gone to a trade school or, they have a number of years of work experience and they've taken a different route to get to where they are in their career. And I don't necessarily see big changes in behavior. And I think more and more we're going to start seeing people taking alternative paths on their career. And each one of those I think is fine depending on the person and what they're looking for. But not a huge difference there. It's just really the time. Students are busy. And the demands on students are really intense. And I think the campus environment, depending on where they go as well, is also quite intense. So people do talk about that.
Sort of to end on sort of a positive, fun note, when you have someone who's just sort of joined a resident house or they've started, what does that growth look like from beginning of their residency to sort of when they're finally ready to leave and go on to another job or a new prospect? What does that look like and how does that sort of interact with Moishe House as a whole?
Yeah, so we like to say our kind of Jewish engagement journey is less you hear a lot of analogies like a funnel or a pipeline, and I much like the word empowering. I really hate that because it's just it's this sort of image of everybody flowing at the same speed and they come into the same point and go out at the same point. And we think of it a little bit differently. We think of it a little bit more like a web. And so on a web, there are lots of different entry points and ways to move around the web. And so people come in and to Moishe House and they exit Moishe House in all different stages and experience levels. So I couldn't say there's one prevailing one. Sometimes people join and they're I'm getting married, so I'm moving out. And we're yay, that's great. Sometimes people are I did this for a couple of years and it was amazing, but now I'm ready to transition because I'm getting exhausted and I'm ready for the next thing. And so it's all different sorts of reasons. But I would say, I guess, something that we see more commonly is people move in and they're not really sure exactly what what the experience is going to be like or what Moishe House is. They might be a little bit more shy, and it's amazing to be able to watch people on this leadership journey that after like the first year and people really feel like I've got this, I'm like making an impact, I know my community, I know what kinds of programs they like, and they just like become these experts in like Jewish community building at the age of like 21, 22, which is beautiful to see. And then like when they exit and they go on, and whether that's professionally or in a lay leadership capacity, join another Jewish organization or take on a leadership role in another Jewish organization. We see that a lot, and to me, that's just like, oh, Dayenu. I mean, there's no Dayenu in this. It's like it keeps going, but it really feels like, okay, this moment in time that they were a part of Moishe House, got out of it what they needed to be able to feel equipped and have the skills and agency to go and transform and continue transforming their Jewish community. So we love to see that.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. Thank you, Tiffany, and also thank you, Tash, for joining us today. It's easy to feel overwhelmed whilst a Jewish student on campus. If anything in this podcast or events on campus have been triggering in any way, don't forget UJS's 24/7 dedicated welfare support line is open. You can call us on 020 742 43281 to speak to one of our experienced staff or volunteers.
A big thank you to Tiffany for sharing her experiences and wisdom with us, and to our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about peace building.
You can follow UJS on all the socials, UJS_UK, for updates on future episodes, events, and opportunities. Don't forget to tune in next time to hear more incredible stories and meet some amazing people on Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. But for now, that's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me, and thank you for having me.